Okay, so let's talk a little bit about mana weaving. Now, mana weaving is basically when you get all of the lands and spells in your deck and you readjust them so that they're in a nice distribution so that you never get mana screwed. So for example, if your deck used to look like this, you might rearrange it so it looks like this. And that's all well and good, because it means you don't get mana screwed, it means you don't get too much, it means you don't get too little. However, there's an inherent problem by adjusting your deck and creating a ratio of lands to spells that you've now influenced. It's that you've eliminated all randomness from your deck, and the rules of the game, in whichever article it is, 103.1, it states that at the start of the game, each player shuffles his or her deck so that the cards are in a random order. By creating a pattern with your mana weaving, you're breaking the rules of the game because you've created an advantage in which you will never have mana problems because your deck's not in a random order. A randomly assorted deck could have 24 lands in a row and then 36 spells in a row. That's a possibility that you've completely taken out of it by influencing how the lands and spells are organised. And as well as this, you've created an unfair advantage over your opponent because they have the possibility of getting mana screwed and you do not. Now, the definition of random, according to 2 dictionaries, and pretty much anybody you ask, is along the lines of it's not being influenced and it's done without a decision being made. And if you are making a decision to mana weave your deck and you're intentionally putting it in an order, that's the complete opposite of random, which means you are explicitly breaking the rules in order to gain an advantage. If someone walked up to you and said, "Oh yeah, we're about to play Monopoly, but I always get dice screwed. I never roll a 6 and I lose because of it, so I'll simply give myself the dice results from 1 to 6 accordingly to probability. It's okay, all the results are still there, they're just in a different order." You'd laugh at them and you'd say, "Fuck off, dude." So there's also this guy called Lee McLean, who's a level 3 judge, which is a regional events guy. You get up to 5 levels of judges, so he's about halfway up there, but there's not that many the higher you go. He himself said mana weaving without further randomization is deck stacking, and deck stacking is explicitly against the rules. But he said this in 2006, so despite it being a whole decade later, people still subscribe to this idea that they're allowed to stack their deck and basically cheat out advantages of people. You have limited options to reply to this statement. In fact, the whole debate sums up into a flowchart quite nicely, and I'm going to try it with you, and you're going to follow it, and it's going to be great, right? So we start on the left-hand side of the screen, and your first question is, do you mana weave? And if you said no, good job, because you don't cheat. If you said yes, well, you've got a second chance. Do you shuffle as well as mana weave? If you say no, you're explicitly stacking your deck, removing randomization, and you're cheating players out of their wins because you have an unfair advantage over them. Any prizes you've received from a store, because you've mana weaved, you have taken from the hands of other players. You have literally stole from them. However, if you do shuffle as well as mana weaving, then we have to ask, does your shuffle create a random deck? And if the answer is yes, then why did you even bother mana weaving in the first place? Because mana weaving removes the randomness, just for you to recreate the randomness that you removed by shuffling. So unless you shuffle enough, you're gaining an advantage, which is illegal and cheating. But if you do shuffle enough, there was literally no point for you to mana weave and you've just wasted everybody and your own time. If you don't shuffle as well as mana weaving, then again you're just explicitly cheating. If you are concerned on shuffling and how to make a randomized deck, I'm happy to make a video on the best ways to shuffle, for both sleeved and unsleeved cards, so that you can avoid the mana screw problems as best as you can without actually cheating. Remember that having too much or not enough mana is actually part of the game itself. It adds an element of randomness, it adds an element of chance. That the newest player at a store could take a game off of the best player in the world purely by chance, and that's a part of the game. It's a good thing about the game and it's a bad thing about the game. That's an argument for a different day. But don't forget to check that you have enough lands in your deck. Like an average 60 card deck would normally default to 24 lands. If it's a very fast deck with very few expensive cards, as in mana cost, not money-wise, you could go as low as 18 lands. If you have a load of slow cards that take a long time to get online and cost a lot, then you'll probably want as many as 27, as high as that. If you're concerned that your opponents are mana weaving, or you literally see them do it and they try to justify it by whatever means they do, just shuffle their deck, and shuffle it quite thoroughly because you know that they have stacked their deck. If it's just a casual event, you don't need to call a judge, but if it is Friday Night Magic and you see someone stacking their deck in between rounds, don't be afraid to just contact the judge and say, I have a concern about what this player is doing, I don't think that's fair on anybody else. because it's not fair on anyone else, and you should never be afraid to call a judge. You shouldn't feel awkward or weird to call somebody out on cheating. That's not how it works. They should feel awkward and weird when you say, hey, isn't that against the rules? And then they have to try and justify it, and the way they justify it just makes it sound worse. Try to always shuffle everybody's deck that you go against, but obviously if they're mana weaving and you can see it, you shuffle it a lot more thoroughly. But if you shuffle everybody's deck, then there won't be any discrimination called out when you heavily shuffle somebody's deck and then you don't shuffle someone else's. And it's just part of the rules. Each player is supposed to shuffle the other person's deck. They can decline it or they can cut it if they want, but that doesn't actually randomize their deck. That doesn't prevent cheating, and there's loads of ways to cheat, and you don't want to be caught out by any of them. A cut won't cut it, so don't get cheated.